The Forgotten Truth, a Detective Sherman cold case. Content warning. This story contains sensitive material including descriptions of violence, psychological distress, and criminal activity. It is intended for viewers 18 years and older only. The following is a dramatization of events. Names and identifying details have been changed to protect the identities of those involved. Legal disclaimer. The contents of this story are presented for entertainment purposes only. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or actual events, is purely coincidental. The opinions and views expressed are those of the fictional characters and do not necessarily reflect those of the creator or platform. Introduction. The call came at 3:17 in the morning. I remember because I was staring at the clock, another sleepless night haunting me like the ghosts of all my unsolved cases. Rain pounded against my bedroom window, creating shadows that danced across the wall restless, just like me. I'm Detective Marcus Sherman, and I specialize in the cases everyone else has given up on. The cold ones, the forgotten ones, the ones that haunt families for generations and keep witnesses looking over their shoulders decades later. My colleagues call me the archaeologist. I dig through the past to unearth buried truths. When my phone rang that night, I already knew it wasn't good news. Nobody calls at that hour with lottery winnings or dinner invitations. Detective Sherman. My voice was gravel, worn down by years of delivering bad news and even more years of chasing shadows. Marcus, it's Captain Hartwell. I need you to come in, now. What's so urgent it can't wait for daylight, Captain? I asked, already reaching for my holster and badge. The Blackwood estate case. There's been a development. My blood ran cold. The Blackwood estate, a 15-year-old cold case that had baffled the best detectives in 3 states. A prominent family found slaughtered in their mansion with no forced entry, no witnesses, and no apparent motive. The prime suspect, Walter Blackwood's business partner, had an ironclad alibi. The case had gone cold before I joined the department, but I'd studied the files obsessively, convinced there was something everyone had missed. What kind of development? I asked. Fully alert now. Someone walked into the station an hour ago, covered in blood. Says they know who killed the Blackwoods. Says they've been waiting 15 years to tell the truth. I hung up and was dressed in 3 minutes flat. The rain had intensified, matching my racing pulse as I drove through the abandoned streets toward the station. Every detective dreams of cracking the one case nobody else could solve. But as I would soon discover, sometimes the truth is far more terrifying than the mystery. Have you ever felt that sensation, that tingling at the base of your skull when you know you're about to step into something that will change everything? That's what I felt as I pulled into the station parking lot. Little did I know this case would take me down a rabbit hole of family secrets, betrayal, and a darkness that had been festering for generations. What would you do if solving a case meant destroying the lives of those left behind? Would you pursue the truth at any cost? These are the questions that would haunt me throughout this investigation, and perhaps they'll haunt you too once you hear the whole story. Welcome to the case that nearly broke me. The case of the Blackwood estate. Exploring the case. The station was unusually quiet when I arrived, save for the steady drip from my raincoat forming a puddle on the linoleum floor. Captain Hartwell met me at the entrance to the interview room, his face grim, the kind of expression reserved for when things are about to get complicated. Before you go in there, Marcus, I need to warn you. Our visitor is unstable. Been rambling about ghosts and family curses. Could be nothing but the delusions of a troubled mind. Or, I countered, it could be the break we've been waiting for. Who is it? Hartwell handed me a thin file. Says her name is Eliza Mercer. No criminal record. Works as a librarian at the public library near the old Blackwood place. No obvious connection to the family or the case. I raised an eyebrow. Then why come forward now, after 15 years? That's what you're going to find out. The interview room was cold. We always kept it that way. The discomfort makes people talk. Eliza Mercer sat hunched at the metal table, her hands wrapped around a paper cup of coffee that had long gone cold. She was in her mid-40s, mousy brown hair streaked with premature gray, and eyes that darted nervously around the room as if expecting someone to emerge from the shadows. "Mercer," I said, settling into the chair across from her. "I'm Detective Shernan. I understand you have information about the Blackwood case." Her eyes locked onto mine with an intensity that was unsettling. "You won't believe me, no one ever does. But I can't keep silent anymore, not after what I found. Why don't you start at the beginning?" I placed my recorder on the table between us. "Tell me everything." She took a deep breath. "I wasn't always a librarian. 15 years ago, I worked as a housekeeper for the Blackwood family. I tried to conceal my surprise. There was no record of an Eliza Mercer working for the Blackwoods. I'd memorized every detail of the case file." "That's interesting," I said carefully. "Your name doesn't appear in any of the employee records." A bitter smile crossed her face. "That's because I worked under a different name back then. Regina Porter. I changed it after what happened. Now, we were getting somewhere." Regina Porter had been interviewed briefly, but she'd claimed to have been on vacation the week of the murders. She'd left town shortly afterward, and attempts to follow up had led nowhere. "Why change your name? Were you afraid of something? Or someone?" Her hands trembled as she pushed the coffee cup away. "Both. I saw something the night before the murders, something I shouldn't have. I convinced myself it wasn't important, that it couldn't possibly be related. But after all these years, I can't escape the possibility that I could have prevented what happened. What did you see, Ms. Mercer?" She leaned forward, lowering her voice, as if afraid of being overheard. Walter Blackwood had a safe behind the painting in his study. I was dusting late that evening when I saw him open it. He didn't know I was there. Inside was a small wooden box, old and ornately carved. When he opened it, he removed something wrapped in velvet. His hands were shaking so badly he dropped it, and that's when I saw it, a strange medallion, bronze or maybe gold, with symbols I'd never seen before. I made a note. No medallion had been found at the crime scene, nor had there been any mention of it in the inventory of Blackwood's possessions. Walter looked terrified when he held it, Eliza continued. He was whispering something, over and over. It sounded like, "It's coming back for us. The debt must be paid. Did you tell the police about this at the time?" She shook her head vehemently. "No. I left for my vacation the next morning. When I heard what had happened, I was too scared. What if whoever wanted that medallion came after me next? So, I ran, changed my name, started over. What made you come forward now, after all this time?" At this, she reached into her pocket and withdrew a newspaper clipping, yellowed with age. It was an article about the recent death of James Thornton, Walter Blackwood's former business partner, the man who had once been the prime suspect. "Thornton died last week," I said. "Natural causes." "There was nothing natural about it," Eliza whispered. "Look at the photograph carefully. I studied the image accompanying the obituary. It showed Thornton at some charity event, an elderly man in an expensive suit, smiling for the camera. Nothing seemed unusual." "Around his neck," she prompted. "And then I saw it partially concealed by his tie, the edge of what could be a medallion on a chain. After I saw this, I went to Thornton's house," Eliza continued. "I've been watching him for years, convinced he was involved. I broke in after the funeral yesterday. I found the medallion in his bedroom." "You broke into a deceased man's home?" I said, unable to keep the incredulity from my voice. I had to know. And I was right. The medallion was there, along with a journal, Walter's journal. It explains everything. "Where are these items now?" Her face fell. "That's why I'm covered in blood. Someone was already in the house when I found them. I heard a noise and hid, but they must have realized someone had taken the medallion. They caught up with me in the parking lot of my apartment building. There was a struggle. I managed to get away, but I think I might have killed him. My pulse quickened. This had just escalated from a cold case to a potential homicide. Where did this altercation take place? She gave me her address, and I immediately dispatched officers to the scene. Then I leaned forward, studying her face carefully. "And where is the medallion now, Miss Mercer?" Her hand moved to her pocket. "I still have it, and the journal. I need you to read it, Detective, because what happened to the Blackwoods wasn't just murder. It was something much worse, and I think it's happening again. If only I'd known then what I know now. If only I'd understood what we were dealing with." Because as I reached for the evidence that would finally crack the Blackwood case wide open, I was unwittingly pulling at a thread that would unravel decades of secrets. Secrets some very powerful people had killed to protect. Tell me, have you ever discovered a truth so terrible you wished you could unknow it? Would you keep digging, even if every instinct told you to walk away? Because that's the choice I faced as Eliza Mercer placed Walter Blackwood's journal in my hands, setting in motion a chain of events that would put everyone I cared about in danger. The evidence lockup officer raised his eyebrows when I signed in the journal and medallion. "What's this about, Shernan? New lead on an old case?" "Something like that," I replied, unwilling to say more. "I need these processed for prints and DNA immediately, and I need the lab to keep it quiet." While the items were being processed, I returned to my desk and pulled out the Blackwood case files. 5 victims total: Walter Blackwood, his wife Caroline, their teenage children Michael and Sophie, and Walter's elderly mother, Agatha. Each killed in a different room of the sprawling mansion, but all in the same manner, a single knife wound to the heart, precise and efficient, like an execution. The working theory had always been that it was a professional hit disguised as a home invasion, but with personal touches that suggested the killer knew the family. Someone had poured glasses of the family's favorite drinks in the study and arranged their favorite flowers in each room. It was theatrical, almost ritualistic. Yet no valuables had been taken, no evidence left behind. I flipped through photographs of the crime scene, stopping at one showing Walter's study. The painting that supposedly concealed the safe was still on the wall, but angled, as if someone had accessed the safe recently. The case notes mentioned the safe had been found open and empty. My phone buzzed. The lab had rushed a preliminary analysis of the medallion. It was indeed gold, and extremely old, possibly medieval. The symbols were identified as alchemical in nature, related to ancient practices of transmutation. And there was something else, microscopic traces of blood in the engraving, too degraded for DNA analysis, but from multiple sources, suggesting the medallion had a long and possibly violent history. As for the journal, it was undoubtedly Walter Blackwood's. His fingerprints were all over it, along with more recent prints that would likely match Eliza Mercer. I began reading, starting with entries from 6 months before the murders. April 15th. James has been acting strange since our trip to the auction house in Boston. He's obsessed with that medallion we found in the collection of European antiquities. I told him it's just a historical curiosity, but he insists it's the real thing, the alchemist's seal. I humor him, but his intensity is becoming concerning. May 3rd, James convinced me to go in with him on the purchase. The price was astronomical, but he was adamant. Said it was an investment that would pay off beyond our imagining. I'm starting to regret going into business with him. His obsessions are affecting his judgment. June 17th, I've been having the dreams again. The same ones from my childhood. Shadows moving through the halls of our home, whispering my name. Mother says it's the family curse manifesting. I told her that's superstitious nonsense, but she gave me that look, the one that makes me feel like a child again. She says the Blackwood fortune was built on blood, and blood will be its price. The entries continued, growing increasingly paranoid and erratic. Walter described research he'd been conducting into his family history, discovering that his great-grandfather, who had founded the family fortune in mining and real estate, had been involved in a secret society dedicated to alchemical practices. The medallion, according to Walter's research, had belonged to this society and was rumored to grant wealth and power for a price. September 28th, James performed the ritual last night. I should have stopped him, but curiosity got the better of me. Nothing seemed to happen, but afterward, he had this look in his eyes, like he'd seen something not meant for human eyes. He says it's working already. His stocks have tripled in value overnight. A coincidence, surely. It has to be. October 10th, I tried to buy James out of his share of the medallion. Offered him triple what we paid. He laughed in my face. Said I didn't understand what we had, what it could do for us. Then he offered to demonstrate. Pulled out a knife and cut his palm. Let the blood drip onto the medallion while reciting words in a language I didn't recognize. The blood. It didn't pool on the metal. It was absorbed, like the medallion was drinking it. I'm writing this down because I need to convince myself I didn't imagine it. November 15th. Mother knows something. She cornered me today, asked if I'd awakened it. When I asked what she meant, she slapped me. Said I was just like my father, meddling with forces I couldn't control. Said the medallion has been in our family before, generations ago, and it brought nothing but ruin. I need to get it away from James before something happens. The final entry was dated the day before the murders. December 3rd, I've taken the medallion from James' safe. He'll be furious, but I need to end this. Mother says there's only one way to break its hold, the ritual of unbinding. It requires sacrifice. She says she's prepared to do what's necessary to protect the children. I don't know what she means, but her resolve frightens me. I've hidden the medallion in our safe for now. Tomorrow, we'll decide what to do. God forgive us for what we've awakened. I sat back, my mind racing. If I were to believe Walter's journal, the Blackwood family had been killed as part of some ritual involving the medallion, a ritual intended to break a family curse. But who had performed it? Walter himself? His mother? Or had James Thornton discovered the theft and taken back what he considered rightfully his? The next step was clear. I needed to speak with anyone still alive who might have known about the medallion or the supposed family curse. And I needed to find out who had attacked Eliza Mercer outside her apartment and whether they were connected to James Thornton. But as I closed the journal, a slip of paper fell out a newspaper clipping I hadn't noticed before. It was from a local paper dated 5 years before the murders, reporting on the suicide of Victor Blackwood Walter's father. The article mentioned he had been found in his study, a single knife wound to the heart, surrounded by strange symbols drawn in ash. The official ruling had been suicide, but the parallels to the later murders were unmistakable. This wasn't just about the medallion. This was about a pattern, a cycle of violence that had been repeating in the Blackwood family for generations. I looked at my reflection in the window of my office, seeing the tired eyes of a man about to step into dangerous territory. If what Walter had written was true, then the Blackwood case wasn't about ordinary murder. It was about something much darker, something that had been covered up for decades by people with the power and motivation to make problems disappear. Would you pursue a case if it meant questioning everything you thought you knew about the world? Would you risk being labeled delusional or worse, just to uncover the truth? Because that's the precipice I stood on, about to leap into an abyss from which there might be no return. Detective Shernan? Officer Davis appeared at my door, his expression troubled. We checked out the scene at Eliza Mercer's apartment building. There's blood in the parking lot, a trail leading to the street, but no body, and we found this. He handed me an evidence bag containing a business card. On it was a simple emblem, a circle surrounding a triangle, and beneath it, the name Thornton Ventures. Whatever had started 15 years ago at the Blackwood estate wasn't over. In fact, I was beginning to suspect it had never stopped at all. The investigation deepens. The rain had finally stopped by the time I left the station, but the sky remained overcast, casting the city in a gloomy half-light that matched my mood. Eliza Mercer had been placed under protective custody. though I wasn't sure who presented the greater threat, whoever had attacked her or her own increasingly fragile mental state. She'd begun talking about sensing presences around her, voices whispering from the shadows. Classic signs of trauma and paranoia, perhaps, or something else entirely. I decided to start with the most obvious connection: Thornton Ventures, the company founded by James Thornton after the dissolution of his partnership with Walter Blackwood. If someone from Thornton's organization had attacked Eliza, it suggested they knew about the medallion and considered it valuable enough to kill for. The Thornton Ventures building dominated the downtown skyline, 70 floors of glass and steel that seemed to pierce the clouds. The lobby was all marble and modernist sculptures, designed to impress and intimidate. The receptionist, a poised woman with a practiced smile, informed me that in the wake of Mr. Thornton's passing, his daughter, Catherine Thornton, had assumed control of the company. "Is Ms. Blank Thornton available?" I asked, showing my badge. "Do you have an appointment, Detective?" Her smile didn't waver, but her eyes hardened slightly. "This is regarding an ongoing investigation. I'm sure Ms. Thornton would prefer to speak with me privately rather than have officers serve her with a formal summons." It was a bluff. I had no grounds for a summons yet, but it worked. Within minutes, I was being escorted to the executive floor by a security guard whose build suggested a military background. Catherine Thornton's office offered a panoramic view of the city, the kind of perspective reserved for those who considered themselves above it all. She was younger than I expected, perhaps mid-30s, with her father's sharp features softened by careful makeup. She stood as I entered, extending a hand across her immaculate desk. "Detective Shernan." "What brings the police to my door so soon after my father's funeral?" Her composure was remarkable, but I detected a tension in her voice, not grief, but wariness. "I'm investigating a case that may have connections to your father," I said, accepting the indicated seat. "The Blackwood family murders." If I'd expected shock or confusion, I was disappointed. Catherine merely nodded, as if she'd been anticipating this conversation for years. "That was before my time in the company, but I'm familiar with the case. Father was initially a suspect, I believe, due to his business relationship with Walter Blackwood." "That's right. Your father had an alibi. He was in Tokyo when the murders occurred, confirmed by multiple witnesses and hotel records." "Then I'm not sure how I can help you, Detective. The case is 15 years old, and the primary suspect is now deceased." I leaned forward slightly. "That's just it, Ms. Thornton. I don't believe your father was the primary suspect. In fact, I'm beginning to think the police investigation was deliberately misdirected." A flicker of something interest, crossed her face. "That's a serious allegation. I have new evidence suggesting the murders may have been connected to an artifact, a medallion, that your father and Walter Blackwood purchased together shortly before the killings." Catherine's reaction was subtle, but unmistakable. A slight stiffening of her shoulders. A momentary pause before she responded. "I'm not aware of any such artifact." "No? It might have been among your father's possessions. Gold with alchemical symbols, possibly worn on a chain. Detective, my father was a collector of many things: art, antiquities, rare books. If such a medallion existed in his collection, it would have been cataloged with his other possessions." She opened a drawer and removed a business card, sliding it across the desk. "This is the contact information for Mr. Leland, our family attorney. He's handling my father's estate. I'm sure he'd be happy to provide you with an inventory." I took the card but didn't put it away. "Miss Thornton, a woman named Eliza Mercer was attacked last night after allegedly removing the medallion and a journal from your father's home. The attacker left behind a Thornton Ventures business card. Would you care to explain that?" For the first time, Catherine seemed genuinely surprised. "I can't. We have hundreds of employees, Detective. Anyone could have taken a card. Or perhaps your father was being watched. Perhaps someone knew he had the medallion and was waiting for the right moment to take it. These are wild speculations," she said, her composure returning. If there was a break-in at my father's home, of course I want that investigated. But connecting it to a 15-year-old murder case based on some fantastical story about a magical medallion seems like a stretch, even for a cold case detective. She knew too much. I hadn't mentioned anything magical about the medallion. How did you know the medallion was supposed to have special properties? I asked quietly. Catherine realized her mistake immediately. Her eyes narrowed, calculating. You implied as much with your talk of alchemy, she recovered smoothly. I studied art history in college. I'm familiar with the symbolism. She was lying, but pushing harder now would only make her defensive. I changed tactics. Did your father ever mention the Blackwood family curse? A humorless laugh escaped her. Detective, my father was a pragmatic businessman. He didn't believe in curses, and yet he died exactly like Walter Blackwood, a single wound to the heart. The medical examiner ruled it natural causes because of his heart condition, but I wonder what they'd find if they took a closer look. That hit a nerve. Catherine stood abruptly, signaling the end of our conversation. I think we're done here, Detective. If you have further questions, direct them to Mr. Leland. And if you're planning to make any public statements suggesting my father's death was anything but natural, be prepared for a lawsuit. As I stood to leave, I noticed a photograph on her desk, Catherine, as a child, standing between her father and a woman I assumed was her mother. They were posed in front of an ornate fountain in what looked like a European city square. Your mother? I asked, nodding toward the photo. Catherine's expression softened slightly. Yes. She died when I was 12, an accident. I'm sorry for your loss, I said, meaning it. Then, deliberately casual, how did it happen? A fall. At our vacation home, her tone made it clear the subject was closed. I thanked her for her time and left, but as the elevator descended, I couldn't shake the feeling that Catherine Thornton knew far more about the medallion than she was letting on. And her reaction to the mention of her mother's death suggested another thread to pull. Back at my car, I conducted a quick search on my laptop for information about Catherine Thornton's mother. Diana Thornton had indeed died from a fall down the stairs at the family's lake house 22 years ago. James had found her body and called the police. The death was ruled accidental, though some articles noted Diana had been taking medication for nervous difficulties. But what caught my attention was the date of her death, December 4th, the same date as the Blackwood family murders, 7 years later. And the same date as Victor Blackwood's suicide, 5 years before that, December 4th. What significance did that date hold? My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was the forensic lab. Detective Shernan, we've completed the analysis of the journal. There's something odd about it. The entries are all written with the same pen and ink, with no variation in pressure or style. Meaning, what? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Meaning it was likely written all at once, not over the course of months, as the dates suggest. This journal is a fabrication, Detective. The implications hit me like a physical blow. If the journal was fake, what was its purpose? To mislead investigators? To establish a false narrative about the medallion and the supposed curse, and most importantly, who had created it and placed it where Eliza Mercer would find it. I needed to speak with Eliza again, to find out exactly how she'd learned about the medallion in the first place. But when I called the station, I received troubling news. Eliza Mercer had escaped from protective custody. She'd complained of feeling ill, and when the officer escorting her to the medical ward turned his back, she disappeared. We've got people looking for her, Captain Hartwell assured me. But there's something else. The medallion is missing from evidence. She took it? We don't think so. The evidence log shows it was checked out properly, with your signature. A chill ran down my spine. I never checked it out, Captain. Well, someone did. And they did a damn good job of forging your signature. I hung up and sat in my car, mind racing. The journal was fake. The medallion was gone. Eliza had disappeared. None of this was coincidence. My instincts told me to go back to where it all began, the Blackwood estate. The house had remained unoccupied since the murders, locked in probate due to disputes among distant relatives claiming rights to the Blackwood fortune. But if the medallion and the supposed curse were connected to the house itself, I might find answers there. As I drove through the old historic district where the mansion stood, the streetlights were just coming on, casting long shadows across the neglected grounds of the estate. The house loomed against the darkening sky, its Victorian architecture a stark contrast to the modern homes that had sprung up around it. Weather and neglect had taken their toll, paint peeling, shutters hanging askew, the once manicured gardens now overgrown. I parked across the street, studying the house. Despite the deterioration, it retained an aura of faded grandeur, a reminder of the wealth and prestige the Blackwood family had once commanded. Movement caught my eye, a flicker of light in a second-floor window. Someone was inside. Drawing my weapon, I approached the rusted front gate. A chain and padlock secured it, but they were old and yielded easily to my lockpicks, a skill I'd acquired in my earlier years working undercover. The gravel path crunched beneath my feet, announcing my presence to anyone listening. The front door was ajar, another sign that I wasn't alone. I pushed it open slowly, wincing at the creaking hinges. The foyer was thick with dust, the once polished marble floor now dull beneath years of neglect. Footprints were visible in the dust, recent ones, leading toward the grand staircase. "Police," I called out, my voice echoing in the emptiness. "Identify yourself." No response, but I heard a faint sound from above movement, someone trying to be quiet and not quite succeeding. I followed the footprints up the stairs, each step a decision to move deeper into what was feeling increasingly like a trap. But I couldn't turn back now, not when I was close to answers. The trail led to the master bedroom Walter and Caroline Blackwood's room. The door was closed, but light seeped from beneath it, a warm glow that suggested candles rather than flashlights. Taking a deep breath, I turned the handle and pushed the door open, my gun leading the way. The scene that greeted me was both unexpected and deeply disturbing. The room had been arranged to recreate the night of the murders. Crime scene photos had been pinned to the walls. Candles had been placed precisely where the victims had fallen, 5 in total, 1 for each member of the family. And in the center of the room, kneeling before what appeared to be an altar assembled from furniture and cloth, was Eliza Mercer. She didn't turn at my entrance, continuing to mutter words I couldn't understand. Before her on the altar was the medallion, gleaming in the candlelight. "Eliza," I said firmly, keeping my gun trained on her, "step away from the altar. You need to come with me." Slowly, she turned to face me. Her eyes were different, not the nervous, darting eyes of the woman I'd interviewed, but focused, intense, almost luminous in the candlelight. "You don't understand what day it is, Detective," she said, her voice eerily calm. "December 4th, the anniversary, the day the door between worlds thins. Eliza, you're not well. You need help. The journal was fake. Someone manipulated you." A smile spread across her face, but it wasn't her smile. It was too confident, too knowing. Of course the journal was fake. I wrote it. I needed you following the trail, building the connections, asking the right questions. Preparation for tonight. I tightened my grip on my weapon. "Who are you? Really?" I've had many names over the years, many faces. The Blackwoods knew me as Agatha. Agatha Blackwood, Walter's mother, one of the victims. "That's impossible," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Agatha Blackwood died 15 years ago." "This body did," she agreed, gesturing to herself. "But I found another. Poor, lonely Eliza, so desperate for meaning in her life. She was easy to persuade. A horrible suspicion was forming in my mind. You killed them, your own family." "I freed them," she corrected. "From the curse, from the cycle. Every generation, the medallion calls to one of us, promises wealth and power beyond imagining, and for a time, it delivers. But the price is always the same blood, the blood of those we love most. My husband, Victor, tried to break the cycle. He thought sacrificing himself would be enough. It wasn't. She picked up the medallion, holding it reverently. Only a complete sacrifice will end it the entire bloodline, offered willingly by one of their own. That's what I tried to do 15 years ago, but I made a mistake. I left one alive. Catherine, I breathed, understanding dawning. Catherine Thornton, she's a Blackwood. Eliza or Agatha nodded. Diana Thornton was my daughter, Walter's sister. She never knew her true heritage. I gave her up for adoption as an infant to protect her from the curse. But blood calls to blood. She married James Thornton, who became Walter's business partner, no coincidence, though neither of them realized it. And they had Catherine, my granddaughter, the last of the Blackwood line. And now you want to kill her too, I said, disgusted. To complete your ritual. To save her, Agatha insisted. The medallion's influence grows stronger with each generation. Catherine has already felt its call, though she doesn't understand what it is. Why do you think she's risen so quickly in her father's company? The medallion rewards ambition, detective, and then it takes everything you love. Put down the medallion, Eliza. Whatever you believe about curses and rituals, murder is still murder. She laughed, a sound that raised the hair on the back of my neck. You still don't believe, even after everything you've seen? Perhaps you need a demonstration. Before I could react, she sliced her palm with a concealed knife and pressed the bleeding wound to the medallion. The effect was immediate and horrifying. The blood didn't flow over the metal, but seemed to be absorbed by it. The symbols on the medallion began to glow with an unnatural light, casting sinister shadows across the walls. What would you give for the truth, Detective Shernan? She asked, her voice taking on a resonant quality that seemed to come from everywhere at once. What sacrifice would you make to know all the answers you've been seeking? The air in the room felt charged, like the moment before a lightning strike. The candle flames elongated, stretching toward the ceiling. And in their dancing light, I saw them shadows moving independently, forming shapes that were almost human, but not quite. This is what the Blackwoods unleashed generations ago, Agatha said, gesturing to the shadows. What they bound to their bloodline in exchange for their fortune, and only blood will satisfy it. I'd seen many things in my years as a detective, the depths of human cruelty, the extremes of human suffering. But nothing had prepared me for this. My rational mind struggled to process what my eyes were seeing, to find some explanation that didn't involve the supernatural. Catherine is on her way here, Agatha continued. I made sure of it. An anonymous tip about new evidence in her father's death. When she arrives, the circle will be complete. The sacrifice will be made. The curse will end. I raised my gun, aiming at the medallion. Drop it, now. You can't stop this with bullets, Detective. Maybe not, I admitted, but I can stop you. Just as I was about to squeeze the trigger, a voice called from downstairs. Hello? Detective Shernan? Are you here? Catherine Thornton had arrived. Agatha's face twisted into a triumphant smile, right on time. In that moment of distraction, I lunged forward, tackling Agatha to the ground. The medallion flew from her hand, skidding across the floor. The candles toppled, and darkness fell as they were extinguished. In the sudden darkness, I felt rather than saw Agatha slip from my grasp. I heard her footsteps retreating down the hallway, toward the stairs, toward Catherine. Catherine, run! I shouted, scrambling to my feet. Get out of the house! But it was too late. A scream echoed from below, followed by a heavy thud, the sound of a body falling. I fumbled for my flashlight, sweeping its beam across the room to locate the medallion. It had come to rest near the altar, its glow fading now that it was no longer in contact with blood. I grabbed it, feeling a strange vibration against my palm, like a heartbeat. Racing down the stairs, I found Catherine crumpled at the bottom, unconscious but alive. Of Agatha, there was no sign. I checked Catherine's pulse, rapid but strong. As I did so, her eyes fluttered open, disoriented at first, then focusing on me. "Detective?" she murmured. "What happened?" "I saw. Someone pushed me. Can you stand?" I asked, helping her to a sitting position. "We need to get out of here, now." She nodded, wincing as she put weight on her ankle. "I think it's sprained." "Who was that woman?" she looked like. "Like who?" I prompted, supporting her as we moved toward the door. Catherine's face paled, like my grandmother in the old photographs. But that's impossible. She died before I was born. We were almost to the door when every window in the foyer shattered simultaneously, showering us with glass. Wind gusted through the openings, unnaturally strong, swirling the dust into choking clouds. And in that wind, voices whispered, hundreds of voices, layered over each other, speaking words I couldn't understand, but that filled me with a primal dread. "The medallion," Catherine gasped, noticing it in my hand. "That's what she wants." "That's what they all want." "Who, Catherine? Who wants it?" Her eyes were wide with terror. "I don't know their names, but they've been watching my family for generations. In the shadows and dreams, waiting." The front door slammed shut before we could reach it, the deadbolt turning on its own. I tried the handle, but it wouldn't budge. "There's another way out," Catherine said. "Through the kitchen, at the back of the house. My father showed me once, years ago." We made our way through the darkened house, the beam of my flashlight our only guide. The temperature had dropped dramatically, our breath visible in cloudy puffs. The medallion in my hand grew warmer, contrasting with the surrounding cold, and I had to resist the urge to drop it. The kitchen was a large, old-fashioned space with ancient appliances covered in dust. Catherine limped to a pantry door at the far end. "Through here, there's a service entrance that leads to the back garden." But as she opened the pantry door, Agatha stood on the other side, her eyes gleaming with an unnatural light. "Hello, granddaughter," she said softly. "I've waited so long to meet you properly." Catherine recoiled, pressing against me. "You're not real. You can't be. More real than you know," Agatha replied, "and I've come to save you from what comes next. The hunger of the medallion. The price it demands." I pushed Catherine behind me, drawing my gun once more. "That's close enough." Agatha's gaze shifted to the medallion in my other hand. "You feel it, don't you, detective? The power. The promise. What would you give to solve every case that's ever haunted you? To know every answer? The medallion can give you that. For a price. For a moment. Just a moment, I was tempted. I thought of all the cases that remained unsolved. All the families still waiting for justice. What if I could give them answers? What if I could know the truth about everything? But then I thought of the Blackwood family, slaughtered in their home. Of Diana Thornton, falling down the stairs. Of James Thornton, found dead of a heart attack that might have been something else entirely. The price was too high. "No deal," I said firmly, raising the gun. "Now, step aside." Agatha's expression hardened. "Then you leave me no choice." She began to chant in a language I didn't recognize, guttural and ancient-sounding. The medallion in my hand grew so hot it became painful to hold, but when I tried to drop it, I found I couldn't open my fingers. It was as if the metal had fused to my skin. The shadows in the corners of the kitchen began to move, coalescing into shapes that approached us with a terrible purpose. I fired at Agatha, but the bullet passed through her as if she were made of smoke. "Run!" I shouted to Catherine, pushing her toward another door that I hoped led outside. "I'll hold her off." "Not without you," Catherine insisted, pulling at my arm, "and not without destroying that thing. It's the source of all of this." She was right. As long as the medallion existed, it would continue to corrupt and destroy. But how did you destroy something that had survived for centuries? The answer came to me as I spotted an old cast-iron stove against the wall, its door hanging open to reveal the firebox inside. "We need to melt it," I said, my voice steady despite the fear coursing through me. "It's the only way." Catherine nodded, understanding immediately. She limped to the stove and began stuffing it with anything flammable she could find: old newspapers, wooden utensils left in drawers, dried-out dish towels. Meanwhile, Agatha's chanting had reached a fever pitch, and the shadows had formed a circle around us, pressing closer. Each shape had a vaguely human outline, but where faces should have been, there was only darkness. "You cannot destroy what has always been," Agatha proclaimed. "The medallion is eternal. The pact is eternal." I ignored her, focusing on helping Catherine build a fire. She had found matches in a drawer and was attempting to light the kindling, but her hands were shaking too badly. "Let me," I said, taking the matches. It took 3 tries with my own trembling fingers, but finally a flame caught. Agatha screamed in rage, a sound that was echoed by the shadow figures surrounding us. They surged forward as one, but seemed unable to cross the circle of light created by the growing fire. "Now, detective," Catherine urged, "throw it in." I raised my hand, ready to cast the medallion into the flames, but hesitated. Not from doubt, but from physical resistance. My arm wouldn't complete the motion, as if invisible hands were holding it back. Agatha laughed, a triumphant sound. "You see? It won't allow itself to be destroyed. The medallion chooses its bearers, and it's chosen you, Detective Shernan, just as it once chose my son and his father before him." "No," I gritted out, fighting against the unseen force. "I reject it. I reject everything it offers." "Your rejection means nothing," Agatha said dismissively. "The medallion's influence grows even now. Soon, you'll begin to see its benefits. Your career will flourish. Cases will solve themselves. Your greatest ambitions will be realized. And then, when you've tasted success beyond your imagining, it will take everything and everyone you love." Catherine moved to my side, her hand closing over mine. "Together," she said. "We'll do it together." Our eyes met, and in that moment, I saw her determination, the strength of a woman who had lived her entire life under the shadow of a curse she hadn't known existed. With her help, I fought against the invisible restraint, inching my hand closer to the fire. The shadows pressed closer, their whispers becoming howls of rage. Agatha's form seemed to flicker, like a television with poor reception, switching rapidly between the appearance of Eliza Mercer and an elderly woman I assumed was the real Agatha Blackwood. "Stop," she commanded. "You don't understand what you're doing. The compact must be honored. The bloodline must end." "No," Catherine said firmly. "It ends here, but not with blood, with choice. We choose to break the cycle." With a final surge of effort, we thrust the medallion into the heart of the fire. The metal met the flames with a sound like a scream, high-pitched and inhuman. The fire flared blue, then green, the heat so intense that we had to step back. Agatha's form convulsed, the transitions between appearances becoming more rapid until she was just a blur of features. The shadow figures surrounding us began to dissipate, their outlines melting back into ordinary darkness. "What have you done?" Agatha wailed, her voice distorting. "You've doomed us all. They'll come for you. They'll come for everyone." And then, with a final cry that seemed to shake the very foundations of the house, she disappeared not gradually, but all at once, leaving nothing behind but a coldness in the air that slowly faded. Catherine and I stood in stunned silence, watching as the fire consumed the medallion. It took longer than metal should have, the gold resisting the heat, but eventually it began to melt, the ancient symbols warping and running together. As the last of it liquefied, a wave of exhaustion hit me so hard that my knees buckled. Catherine caught me, though she was barely steadier on her feet. "Is it over?" she whispered. I looked around at the kitchen, now just an ordinary abandoned room with no sign of the supernatural events we'd witnessed. The fire in the stove was dying down to normal orange flames, consuming the last of the kindling. "I think so," I said, though a part of me remained uncertain. Some things, once seen, can never be unseen. Some knowledge, once gained, can never be unlearned. We made our way out through the service entrance Catherine had mentioned, emerging into the cool night air of the back garden. The sky had cleared, stars visible overhead. Ordinary, normal, as if the world hadn't just tilted on its axis. "What happens now?" Catherine asked as we reached my car. It was a question with no easy answer. How did one return to everyday life after experiencing something that defied rational explanation? How would I write this up in my report? Who would believe us? "Now," I said slowly, "we make sure the truth about the Blackwood family is known, the parts of it we can prove anyway. Your father's connection to them, the real motive behind the murders. Not curses or medallions, but a family secret that someone was willing to kill to protect." Catherine nodded, understanding the necessity of the fiction. "And Eliza Mercer? A troubled woman who became obsessed with the case. When we find her..." I trailed off, uncertain. Would we find her? Or had Eliza ceased to exist the moment Agatha took control? "You know," Catherine said softly, "I've always felt like I was being watched. Like there was something important I was supposed to do, but I didn't know what it was." "Do you think that was the medallion's influence?" "Possibly," I acknowledged. "Or maybe just intuition. Some part of you that knew there were unanswered questions about your family." She was silent for a moment then. "I'm the last one, aren't I? The last of the Blackwood line." "Yes," I said gently, "but that doesn't define you. You get to decide what that means, what legacy you want to create." A small smile touched her lips. A better one, I hope. As I drove her back to the city, I found myself reflecting on the nature of inheritance, not just blood and genes, but the invisible threads that connect us to our ancestors. The secrets and burdens passed down through generations. Catherine Thornton had inherited a curse she never knew existed, but in choosing to break it, she had claimed her own destiny. Would you have the courage to do the same? To reject the path laid out for you, even if it meant sacrificing power and advantage? To choose a different way forward, even in the face of forces beyond your understanding? These are the questions that haunt me still, long after the case was officially closed. The medallion is gone, its power broken. But the memory remains, a reminder that some mysteries are better left unsolved, some powers better left unclaimed. And yet, on dark nights when the wind howls outside my window, I sometimes wonder if we truly ended it, or if we merely interrupted a cycle that will, in time, begin again. Watch your shadows carefully, my friends. And remember that the most dangerous promises are those that offer exactly what you most desire. The moral lesson. There's a stillness in the hours before dawn that I've come to appreciate. It's in these quiet moments, when the rest of the world sleeps, that I often find myself reflecting on the cases that have shaped my career, and none more so than the Blackwood estate mystery. It's been 3 years since that night at the old mansion. 3 years since Catherine Thornton and I confronted a darkness that defied rational explanation. The official case file tells a simplified version of events. Eliza Mercer, a woman with deteriorating mental health and an obsession with a 15-year-old cold case, created an elaborate hoax involving a fake journal and a medallion she claimed was connected to the murders. In her delusion, she believed herself to be Agatha Blackwood, returned from the dead to complete some arcane ritual. The medallion itself was logged as destroyed during investigation, with no mention of supernatural properties or centuries-old curses. Catherine Thornton's connection to the Blackwood family was documented. DNA testing confirmed she was indeed Walter Blackwood's niece, but the implications were framed in terms of inheritance disputes rather than ancient blood. Pacts. It's a story that fits neatly into boxes labeled obsession, mental illness, and family secrets. A story the department could close with confidence, the public could digest without discomfort, and I could report to my superiors without risking my credibility or career. But you and I know there was more to it. Much more. Eliza Mercer's body was found 2 weeks after the incident. washed up on the riverbank miles downstream from the city. The medical examiner determined she had been dead for at least 10 days, her lungs filled with river water. Suicide, they concluded, the final act of a troubled mind. But I saw the look in her eyes when Agatha's consciousness took control that wasn't Eliza anymore. Whatever entity had inhabited her body had discarded it once its purpose was served. A convenient explanation, perhaps, but one that lets me sleep at night. Catherine Thornton resigned from Thornton Ventures shortly after our encounter, using her inheritance to establish a foundation focused on supporting children affected by family violence. We keep in touch, meeting occasionally for coffee to discuss ordinary things, the weather, books we've read, current events. We never directly speak about what happened that night, but in her eyes, I see the same knowledge that weighs on me, the awareness that beneath the surface of our rational world, other forces move and breathe and hunger. As for me, I continue my work with cold cases, bringing closure to families who have waited too long for answers. But I approach each case differently now, more attuned to the patterns and connections that might suggest something beyond ordinary human malice. Not every murder has a supernatural explanation. Of course, most are tragically mundane in their motives and execution. But I remain vigilant for those that might be part of a larger pattern, a deeper darkness. Which brings me to the moral of this story. If such complex events can be distilled to a single lesson, beware the price of ambition. The medallion offered power and success beyond ordinary means, but everything it gave, it eventually took back with interest. The Blackwood family built a fortune and a legacy that lasted generations, but at what cost? Lives cut short, families destroyed. A cycle of violence that perpetuated itself across decades. This pattern plays out even without supernatural influences. How many people sacrifice their principles, their relationships, even their health on the altar of success? How many compromise just this once, only to find themselves on a path they never intended to travel? I've seen it in the cases I've solved. The corporate executive who began with a minor accounting manipulation and ended as a murderer protecting his empire of fraud. The respected doctor who started by cutting small corners and finished by intentionally harming patients to maintain his reputation. The loving parent whose determination to give their child the best twisted into a possessive obsession that ended in tragedy. The most dangerous temptations don't appear as obvious evil. They come disguised as opportunity, as advantage, as just doing what's necessary. They offer shortcuts to the things we most desire, asking only small compromises in return. But those compromises accumulate, changing us bit by bit until we barely recognize ourselves. What would you sacrifice for success? For wealth? For power? For knowledge? Where would you draw the line? And how confident are you that you wouldn't move it just this once? I ask myself these questions daily, knowing how close I came to accepting what the medallion offered. In that moment, when Agatha tempted me with the ability to solve every case that had ever haunted me, part of me wanted to accept. Part of me was willing to pay whatever price it asked. That's the true horror of the Blackwood curse. Not that it was supernatural, but that it exploited something fundamentally human. Our willingness to justify increasingly troubling actions in pursuit of our goals. So as I sit here in these quiet hours before dawn, watching the sky lighten from black to deep blue to the first pale hints of sunrise, I leave you with this thought. Examine your ambitions carefully. Consider not just what you want to achieve, but who you want to be along the way. Because the path you choose shapes you, step by step, choice by choice, compromise by compromise. And sometimes, the price of getting everything you want is losing everything that matters. Would you recognize when you've crossed that line? Would I? I'd like to think so. But then, I imagine Walter Blackwood once thought the same. Call to action. Before I close this case file for the night, I want to speak directly to you. Yes, you who have followed this dark journey with me from beginning to end. The Blackwood case may seem extraordinary, outside the realm of your everyday experience. After all, how many of us will encounter ancient medallions with supernatural powers or confront family curses stretching back generations? But strip away these elements, and what remains is a story about choices, the small decisions that, accumulating over time, determine not just our fate, but the kind of person we become. And these choices, my friends, are ones we all face daily. How many times have you been tempted to take a shortcut, to compromise your values just this once, to choose expedience over integrity? How often have you quieted that small voice that warns when something isn't right, telling yourself it's for a greater good or a worthy goal? I've watched too many lives unravel because someone failed to recognize the moment when they stepped onto a path that would lead them places they never intended to go. The businessman who began with creative accounting and ended with embezzlement. The partner who justified a small lie that grew into a double life. The parent whose protective instincts warped into control and manipulation. These tragedies don't announce themselves with dramatic music or obvious warning signs. They begin with whispers, with rationalizations, with choices that seem small and insignificant at the time. So I urge you share this story with those you care about. Not because they need to fear supernatural medallions, but because they need to be vigilant about the ordinary, everyday temptations that can lead good people down dangerous paths. Help them understand that success achieved through compromised integrity is no success at all, that power gained at the expense of one's humanity exacts a terrible price. Put yourself in Walter Blackwood's position for a moment. When he and James Thornton found that medallion, when they first performed the ritual described in the journal, they didn't see themselves as villains. They saw opportunity, advantage, a way to secure their ambitions. The descent that followed happened gradually, almost imperceptibly, until suddenly they were in too deep to find their way back. Could you recognize that moment in your own life? Would you have the courage to step back from the brink, even if it meant sacrificing something you deeply desired? These are not abstract philosophical questions, but practical matters of how we navigate a world full of temptations and compromises. The time to consider them is now, before you find yourself in a situation where the right choice becomes almost impossible to make. If this story has resonated with you, if you found value in the journey we've taken together through the darkness of the Blackwood estate, I ask you to do two things. First, share it with someone who might benefit from its warning. Not to frighten them, but to prepare them for the subtle ways that ambition can corrupt and good intentions can lead astray. Second, take a moment to examine your own path. Where are you now, and where are you headed? Are there compromises you've made that need to be reconsidered? Red flags you've ignored that deserve attention? It's never too late to change course, to recommit to the person you truly want to be. And if you've appreciated joining me on this investigation, I invite you to subscribe to the Shernan Detective Series. Each case offers not just the thrill of the chase and the satisfaction of mysteries solved, but insights into the human condition that might help you navigate your own journey with greater wisdom and awareness. Like, share, subscribe, not for my benefit, but because these stories matter. They remind us that our choices have consequences, that integrity once compromised is difficult to restore, and that the greatest danger often lies not in external threats, but in our own capacity for self-deception. Until next time, this is Detective Marcus Shernan, reminding you to watch your shadows carefully, both the literal ones and those that sometimes grow within our own hearts when we aren't paying attention. Stay safe out there. And remember, the truth always finds its way to the light, no matter how long it takes.